Panels, Hawker in the Sky News Centre, Grahame Morris here with me in Canberra. Grahame, let me start with you on Iran. We just heard from Andrew Wilkie. He's very critical of the idea of sharing any intelligence with what he clearly believes is about the last country you should share anything with. What do you think? It seems to be a rather sensitive issue, but Iran would apparently know a lot more about what's going on in Iraq than most countries.
Yeah, I gather Iran's not real keen on sharing anything intelligent with Andrew Wilkie either. Look, you know, if you have a look at the neighbourhood, Iran, you've got Afghanistan, you've got Iraq, you've got Syria. You know, that's not a very nice neighbourhood, and we're squillions of miles away. And, you know, you would think their intelligence would be better than ours. If you have a look at the moment, these young blokes who are ending up over there, we don't find out they're there until they're dead, or there's a picture of them, you know, threatening to chop off someone's head. You know, at least, you know, I don't know what our intelligence people have got, but in a public sense, that's the first we're finding out. It's the first families are finding out.
It raises a difficult question, though. What would Australian authorities do with the information if they said, look, there's an Aussie over there in that town?
Well, look, I suppose that's right. But, you know, you'd go and have a talk to the family first.
Yeah.
And do you know where your son is? Oh, yeah, he's playing football and working at Wathali. Well, no, he's not. He's over there. Well, you know, they will have ways. Many of them will have ways of talking to their home communities and see if they can get their young blokes back again.
Andrew Wilkie's concern is clearly built on history and Iran's very poor behaviour, and you know it has been a long time accused state-sponsored terrorism, and he points to the disinformation that they spread and the way they used intelligence to really get their own enemies, enemies of their own regime. They could essentially pass on a list of names, he says, of people who they say are Islamic State but are really just enemies of the regime in Iran. I guess that's the hard part of this.
Look, that is hard. But at the moment, we are flying blind. And anybody who gives us any information at all about these young Australians, that's going to be a big improvement. Yeah, we might get some collateral crap in the meantime. But, you know, if we can bring 3 or 4 of these people home, or at least, you know, have some information that, you know, some young blokes are about to get on a boat, about to get on a plane and go over there because of something they've heard, then worth doing. Yeah. And apart from all that, I do think if you look at Foreign Minister Bishop's performance on that, she's a class act. Really, really class act. It's
been a very interesting visit for Julie Bishop, Bruce Hawker, to you. We haven't seen the US engage Iran to this degree. Yes, there are six-power talks on nuclear issues, but when it comes specifically to the fight against ISIL in Iraq and Syria, this has been really the first Western overture to try and deepen the cooperation at least, and indeed even some intelligence sharing. What do you think about this idea?
Well, I think it's a good idea, and I suspect that it's probably important for Australia to be leading in this regard rather than the United States. I mean, they've got a long and much more complicated history with Iran, dating back to the days of the Ayatollah and the hostages in Tehran back in the 1970s. You'll recall that was a very fraught period for the United States, and of course Iran was on the other side of the story when they were fighting Iraq, and the Allies and the United States were supporting Iraq. So it's shifting sands, and I think that's a factor that, you know, people like Wilkie have to, you know, be given some credit for. But as Grahame says, you know, these are very difficult times, and in a sense our enemy's enemy is our friend here. I think there's a lot to be said for moving in this way. Obama's come in for considerable criticism from the Israelis and others for his engagement on the nuclear issue, and I think this is all part and parcel of that exercise. So, yeah, I think
the
Israelis
are never going to like any engagement with Iran when Iran, given the position that Iran takes against Israel, are they?
No, they're not, and I think that's already been factored into the equation by the Americans in moving in this way. But I suspect that there'll be some pressure on Australia over this issue too from the Israelis and from the Israeli lobby in Australia. I don't think that'll go unnoticed by them. So all of this is very complex, as always is the case with Middle East politics and diplomacy. But look, I've got to say, I thought that she was pretty impressive in the way in which she was conducting herself, and I don't know if the Prime Minister will be all that excited about how she's really, really being very successful at a time when he's sculling beers at the Oak Hotel. So,
okay. Well, I'm sure he'd be happy to see his Foreign Minister doing a good job. Let's talk about the budget. Well, you would assume. Let's talk about the budget, because we're 3 weeks tomorrow from the budget being handed down, and we heard yesterday Joe Hockey, the Treasurer, arguing that deficits, yes, they will shrink, but Grahame, as a proportion of GDP, and that's the important caveat there, isn't it?
Well, look, it is how the rest of the world talks. They say, how big is your deficit? Oh, compared to our GDP, it's X percent.
Or 12%.
So, we're just used to working in raw figures. And it's not as if, the Treasurer can say goodbye to the raw figures. They're always going to be there. So we're going to know what it is. But it's just when you're talking globally, nobody internationally almost understands they can't spell a surplus.
But do you agree, though, in Australia, the concept has been the dollar figure? We got a $40 billion deficit, as the coalition keep telling us.
I do.
And if it's still just as bad, it's not a good.
I accept that. You can't. The figure is going to be there in the budget paper. It's going to be on the front page of the media. You can't really say, don't look at that figure. Look at this one.
Percentage one.
It's just Treasurer talk when they talk to each other. But at home, no, it won't work.
And do you think? How much of a political problem is this for the government? Do you think they're going soft on the whole idea of budget repair?
No, I think it's sheer reality, and I actually think that anyone who has to go to Centrelink from here on in, they ought to curse trade unions for putting them out of a job and making them too expensive to employ, and B, curse the Senate, and C, when they turn up at Centrelink, they ought to say, Bill Shorten sent me. This would be a very different budgetary situation if the Senate got out of the way and let the Treasurer and the Prime Minister and the government get our economy back into shape. That's what it's all about. But you can't do that. They won't be able to do it in this budget. So they're sort of mugged by a reality of why try to do X, Y, and Z when it's going to hit the Senate brick wall.
Sure, but because they were defeated on many of aspects in the first budget, is that a reason to not try again, to basically hang up the boots?
It's called learning. Politics is still one of the... Yes, it's the art of persuasion and the policy of ideas, but it's also the art of the possible.
Right.
And if you haven't got the numbers in the Senate, what's the point of giving yourself an uppercut?
Well, Bruce, that leads to the question about Labor's position in all of this, and really whether, given the position to take to vote down a lot of those savings measures last year, if this budget number 2 doesn't have similar harsh savings measures, what will there be left for Labor to criticise?
Well, I think there are going to be real questions around what they could have been doing with superannuation and other issues like that. What's going to happen with the GST? They're still going to be raising serious questions about where we're going to go with their economic management strategies. In a sense, they're probably lucky that the Senate did block those measures last year, because if they'd let them through, as I'd been advocating, the government would be in all sorts of trouble now trying to explain why they had a GP co-payment scheme, why they had parental leave schemes that were so generous that they couldn't be afforded. In a way, they've sort of hit the reset button by not getting their draconian budget through the last time around, and I think that's an interesting sort of development that's taken place here. It may
sure,
be.
But if it is a dull budget, this one coming up in a few weeks, if there aren't further spending cuts. How long can Labor sustain an attack built on last year's budget?
Well, I think they will have to deal with this year's budget, but I think there are going to be other areas that they can continue to make a real stand on. For example, around the whole taxation regimes for multinationals, that's a very significant issue. As I said before, superannuation, when are they going to really grasp the nettle about those extremely wealthy superannuants getting all that taxpayer money when they don't really need it? But I think that the government's task is going to be a lot easier, and therefore Labor's task forecasting it's going to be a lot harder with this budget than with the previous one. I think what they can do, though, is point to the hypocrisy of the government when they're claiming on the one hand that there's a budget emergency 12 months ago and now everything's pretty much okay. I mean, that looks ridiculous, I think, on any test. And I think a lot of people are scratching their heads about that.
And that's the problem, Grahame, isn't it? It'll be the government being attacked from the right, whether it's business groups, whether it's conservative commentators, whether it's, you know, the likes of Peter Reith even today saying a double dissolution is there, trigger, you know, mechanism is there for a reason. You've got to fix the budget. You've got to keep pushing these things, not just give up.
Well, that's right. But if you look at all of those people, they don't have to get re-elected.
True.
They aren't the decision makers. They're sitting on the sidelines. You know, everyone would love to be in a position to do the orthodox, and that's get everything back into surplus and we can all go and spend some money wisely again. But, you know, that's not real. China's fallen in a heap, the Senate's bleak and hopeless to deal with, and all of a sudden you've got poor old Treasurer there getting whacked by everyone. And most of them, you know, have no idea how Canberra works. Are struggling with their own blinking business budgets, and here they are lecturing the Treasurer on the impossible, which is, hey, fix the Senate. Well, whoopee. And a double dissolution is just so naive, and for the very good political reason in that suicide is dangerous.
We saw today Chris Richardson, to a renowned budget watcher with Deloitte Access Economics, warn in their budget monitor that if China does slow a lot more sharply than it has been, then we could potentially be facing recession in Australia, that we don't have the ability to cut interest rates a whole lot further. Yes, there's a bit there because we're still at 2.25. And in the budget, we don't have a whole lot of money to splash around either. Grahame, how seriously do you think we should be taking this threat or this risk?
Well, Chris Richardson, one of the better economists in the country. He's sort of 80% right and 20% wrong. I hope he's 20% wrong on this one. Look, it's hard to see China disappears off its own backside. It is still growing quite well. It's still got to take our stuff, but not at the rate we expected. And that is, again, you know, why that Senate obstruction last time. We could have been in quite a strong position, as Howard and Costello were with their first budget. Asia fell in a heap. Did it affect us? No, we're in a good position. And the same thing, if China fell in a heap, are we in a good position now to emerge unscathed? Well, no.
Yeah, Bruce, how worried are you about the prospects of China slowing in a much more rapid way?
Well, this is the first time I really heard about it, you know, in an escalated, contraction. I mean, we've seen this realignment away from, you know, a lot heavy dependence on our imports of coal and iron ore, and I think that will probably continue for some time. But I think there are enough levers in that command economy that is China for them to be able to drive some more growth, or at least to slow any further contraction. So, look, I'm not an economist. I don't know the answer to it, but I'd be surprised if it was going to really be a serious problem in the short to medium term. That's my gut feeling, because we really haven't seen any indicators of that previously, other than a natural contracting after that massive growth period that they went through, you know, for such a long period of time. So, you know, I'm not all that concerned about it, I've got to say. But if they do contract and the Australian economy contracts, then that is bad news for the government as well, because you know, the big thing that Tory governments have always been able to argue is that they are the ones who manage the economy the best. And as we've seen in the past, it doesn't matter if there are external factors coming to play, you're still going to be blamed if you're the government of the day and unemployment's going up and the economy's contracting.
We will see. A few weeks to go, and any loss of revenue is certainly bad news at this point. Bruce, Hawker, Grahame Morris, thank you very much. We'll catch up next week. Quick break. We're going to look at a potential breakthrough medicine when it comes to dealing with advanced melanoma. Stay with us.
You don't need to be a big business to get the best possible